to the Payroll Podcast with your host, Nick Day of JGA Recruitment, specialist payroll recruiters.
Hello and welcome to the Payroll Podcast. My name is Nick Day from James Gray Associates, specialists in payroll and HR recruitment. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Adrian, Morrissey, Senior Commercial Manager at Immedis. If you're not currently familiar with Immedis but would like to check out the business during this recording, then please go to immedis.com. That's IMMEDIS.com. You can check out the company and more about their services as we undertake this recording. So, Immedis are a specialist division of the Taxbacks Group, a multi-award-winning global financial services group established in 1996. They have over 1,200 employees in over 33 offices worldwide, providing payroll and tax services to organisations and individuals in over 100 countries every day. Prior to Immedis, Adrian spent 6 years working in the recruitment industry for leading international recruiters Robert Walters and Capital Markets before joining Immedis in 2017. Now, I met Adrian recently at the Global Payroll Association's UK Summit in London, where Adrian was giving a talk on global transformation and technology in the payroll industry. And it quickly became apparent that he has a wealth of knowledge on global payroll, global compliance, and global payroll software. So I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome him to the Payroll Podcast for this recording. So Adrian, welcome.
Thanks, Nick. Great to be here.
Good to have you here too. For those that have listened to the podcast before, we always start with 5 technical questions.
5 quick questions.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your background at Immedis, your current role with the company, and also the thinking behind the Immedis company name?
Perfect. So my own background is my position in the company is very much to help Immedis grow. So a lot of my time is spent liaising with customers in the market, existing customers, prospects, and also just the wider market around understanding what the major challenges are. I act, I guess, as the conduit between what the market is talking about, the pain points that exist, and obviously taking that information back into our in-house specialists in Immedis, both from a technical infrastructure perspective, but also then from a payroll delivery and tax expertise perspective. So it's continually educating and updating our own internal expertise on what the market is crying out for and trying to find solutions then to bring that back out and make our customers' lives a little bit easier.
Excellent. I did mention the company name in there because there's a little bit about the background to Immedis and where that name comes from.
Yeah, so the word Immedis, you probably won't find it in a dictionary, but it's a play on the word immediate. So what we've done is we've combined a cutting-edge piece of technology. It's a technology-enabled solution to accommodate a global payroll platform, but it's backed up by in-house international tax and payroll qualified professionals. So the word Immedis is a play on the word immediate, and that specifically relates back to our customer service and the ability to react quickly on the spot to our customers' questions.
Excellent. I know we're going to go into some of that in a little bit more detail later on in this podcast as well. So now we met at the GPA Global Payroll Summit in March, and at that time you were one of the keynote speakers. Can you give the listeners an overview of what you discussed in your presentation at the summit?
Yeah, it's I suppose a lot of the conversations that I'm having with the wider market currently is very much driven by technology. What's the latest and greatest? What's available to me? And how can it make my life easier? So my presentation at the UK Summit was focused on global transformation and technology as it relates specifically to payroll. So what I did was I looked at the developments in global payroll, where we've come from, where we are now, and where we're going to, without a crystal ball, but it was a prediction based on an educated assessment, but very much looking at how technology can assist with a fully managed end-to-end compliance solution from a payroll perspective. So we looked at the integration piece. What are the most, I suppose, slick piece of technology available to customers in the wider payroll market from an integration perspective? We also looked at the various degrees from a maturity perspective around the integration kind of spectrum. We also looked at, what the analytics piece behind technology that's available to the wider market, and again, the analytics maturity spectrum and the various different degrees and levels of access that customers have to that. We also looked at a number of different things around shortening the time that it takes to process a payroll, focused a little bit around the RPA, the robotic process automation scenario, which ultimately a lot of companies are trying to get to, which will shorten the time it takes to process, but it'll increase the time allocated to the customer to actually input their changes.
Fantastic. And obviously RPA is a real hot topic in the payroll industry at the moment. An article recently in the CIPP magazine about it, and I know it's something that a lot of people are talking about at the moment. So you mentioned global payroll compliance there as well. So what advice would you give from an Immedis point of view that perhaps would help a business simplify its global payroll compliance requirements?
Yeah, look, I suppose there's no real hard and fast answers to it. There is, I suppose, a general response to that, but what works for one company won't work for another. So I guess the advice I would have on that is to look at, depending on the size and the headcount of a business, to look at centrally managing pockets or regions for the company. If the headcount isn't overly large, then ultimately you can look at a full global oversight. But I think for companies who would have anything in excess of 40, 50,000 employees and they're in anything in excess of kind of 50 countries across the globe, they absolutely will have a huge level of complexities around the local jurisdictional requirements across the globe. So I think central management with regional support led by experts is absolutely critical. Technology will allow you to get to a certain point, but it certainly doesn't allow for the intricacies and the changing regulatory landscapes across the globe. So having these in-country experts delivering on the ground, reporting back up into a regional oversight management team who will then liaise with you, the customer, in those time zones and in those regions, I think is absolutely critical. But I think the key message there is having on-the-ground expertise, in-country delivery teams who understand the nuances, but centralizing and managing it from a global perspective at the top level to actually manage across the globe.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you may have answered part of my next question in that answer, but I know international companies with multi-jurisdictional payrolls often face really complex challenges. I know that some particularly complex payrolls in France and Benelux regions in particular can be quite challenging. And what do Immedis do to help simplify some of those challenges?
Well, I think what we do is we really work and listen to our customer base and the prospects that we speak to identify best practice. Now, when I say best practice, I mean best practice for that specific institution. It doesn't necessarily mean a blanket best practice that will work across the board for everyone. So it doesn't mean changing the entire picture or the entire landscape overnight. We tend to push back and advise and don't just accept the direction from the customers that we support. For example, companies who have, historically had multiple outsourced providers who assisted them with the delivery of their global payroll, moving to an overnight global solution can often be a daunting task, but it can often be too much to handle from a successful perspective. So we will often split things up, like companies, again, taking the bigger end of the scale who would have 10, 15, 20,000 in a region specifically, like EMEA, for example. Many, many times we've actually advised to split Europe and the Middle East and Africa and focus on one of those regions at a time, because the sheer complexities and the deep dive relationships required in Middle East and Africa, for example, to actually liaise with the on-the-ground local tax authorities is absolutely critical. And getting the compliance piece right in those particular jurisdictions is very much driven by historic relationships, and getting that right and focusing on where the biggest compliance and risk challenges are certainly more important to companies than something that's working who doesn't have the same risks, but it's just moving because you feel it's the right thing to do.
So it's a very management consultancy type approach. It's not necessarily a client coming and saying, we need this. Actually, sometimes you might undertake a review and come across a different type of solution to what the client may have initially thought they needed.
Well, it works both ways. I mean, you want to set something up that allows your customer to achieve success, and that also works from our perspective as well. I mean, we don't want to just take something and run with it because that's what the customer suggested. They often haven't been through the process before either. So It's pushing back and advising on what you feel best works for them, obviously in a very consultative way. But, a lot of the people in our business in Immedis are actually from Big Four backgrounds, consultancy backgrounds, from mobility tax backgrounds, and that then allows for a more consultative approach, and they've been used to large scale project management initiatives in the past. And it's certainly not a one size fits all. It's what works for any individual company, and we also look at the historic practices that have existed in those businesses as well.
Excellent. You mentioned compliance in there as well. Obviously, we've got the other hot topic in the payroll arena at the moment, which is GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulations, coming into play in May. What can payroll leaders do, in your view, now to take advantage of these data protection changes? Look,
it's certainly a potential headache. I think a lot of companies have they've managed this in a best practice scenario to date. I mean, it's moving away from a best practice to following a strict set of legislative guidelines, which is the real kind of fundamental shift. It's becoming law as opposed to a guideline. But I think fundamentally companies do have really kind of proactive measures in place across the board. I think the most difficult part for any company is actually understanding, how to actually map out, what do I hold? What do I do with that information? And who do I share that information with? They're kind of three really critical pieces of information around GDPR. Now, from me speaking to a lot of businesses across the globe, and it's not just European business, a lot of companies in the US or even APAC are rolling out GDPR best practice in those regions as well, because it's typically a global solution we offer. So these companies are actually seeing it as an opportunity to clean up the information that they hold. And I'm talking about the information required specifically to deliver payroll. What we have seen is the volume of companies who are now moving to a more automated payroll delivery solution. And that includes looking at their own internal systems and processes. So a lot of companies have now looked at new HRIS solutions from a global perspective and deploying those internally to really clean up the data that they actually house to deliver payroll. So what they need to do is to clean that data up, input it into their HRIS system, and find an outsourced solution that can integrate into that and automate the feed of information from their internal HR systems to the external consultants or external outsource providers that they engage with. And as I said, the key piece here from a compliance perspective is mapping all of that ahead of time. So what information do I hold? What do I do with that information, and who do I share it with? And aligning that map to the risks that are associated and trying to find solutions then that fully protect the transfer of that information from internal to the external outsource provider. Sure.
That's very eloquently put. Excellent. Okay. So, I mean, we've talked briefly about global payroll compliance, some of the multi-jurisdictional challenge payroll people can face, and GDPR. If you were to summarize the services that Imedis offered a global client, what would they be in summary? What are the key sort of things that Imedis could offer a global payroll?
So the three key pieces that we offer will be a fully managed end-to-end payroll solution. And that's everything from taking the changes, managing the remittance to the tax authorities. The second piece will be managing the payments piece on behalf of our customers. So we manage, once a payroll is signed off, we can deliver payments globally in local currency to the end customer, which is the employees in local currency, but also then the remittance to the local tax authorities and the statutory bodies like pension providers, healthcare providers, etc. And the final piece then will be mobility tax solutions, which we can also centrally manage alongside our local hires from a payroll perspective as well.
Excellent, fantastic. And I think that'll lead us in nicely to the next set of questions we've got. But before we get there, we're going to find out a little bit more about you.
Time to find out more about you.
So, first question for you, Adrian. How would your friends describe you, and how would your work colleagues describe you?
Interesting question. I think my friends would always describe me as quite driven and competitive. That spawns from maybe my sporting background. I suppose the reason I do what I do is I'm quite a creative person, which my work colleagues would obviously attest to. Quite collaborative, but I suppose the key message will be the sociable element. I'm very, very focused on long-term relationships, developing relationships, and I'm intrigued by the sheer volume and variances around the types of individuals that I interact with on a daily basis. So they'd be some of the key kind of aspects of me as a person.
Recruitment is a relationship game, so it's probably why you were so successful in that industry before moving into the role at Imedis. You mentioned your sporting background. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So I would, for the Irish audience potentially listening to this, that I'd probably be better known for my endeavours in Gaelic football. So I would have represented my county for almost 10 years, played in Croke Park many times in front of 80,000 people. So it was an interesting number of years. It was a 6 days a week commitment from a training perspective. So Very difficult to manage because it's an amateur sport and we had full-time jobs alongside it. But the bigger message and the bigger education that I got from that was just the sheer access to learning how to discipline yourself from a professional and a sporting perspective. And that it really allowed me to transition into some of the positions I've had to date with that kind of discipline and drive in mind. So
amazing. I don't know if I've just stolen your thunder here from the second question, but I was going to ask you to tell me something about you that perhaps other people won't know.
Yeah, no, you didn't take it away at all. A lot of people
Excellent.
will have known about that background. But Gaelic football, funnily enough, is an extremely physical game. It's a cross between rugby and soccer, I guess, if you were to look at it. Funny enough, I actually represented my country in badminton as well. So two polar ends of the opposite scale. So
sure.
Yeah, so that's something that I haven't spoken to the masses about, but there you go. They'll know about it now. So
a bit of a delicate sport mixed with quite a physical. I played Gaelic football once, many years ago over in Dublin, and it was a bit of an awakening for me from a football background. It was a bit more physical than I was used to. It's good fun though. It's good fun. So, okay, slightly different here. We do this for everybody on the podcast, but you are abducted by aliens and they want to learn more about our species. What item would you take with you?
What item would I take with me? I would take with me a Texas Hold'em poker set.
Okay, nice. You play a lot?
I play a bit for fun. I just think it'd be interesting to assess my capabilities against a different race.
Fair enough. Again, it's a slightly similar question then, really. But what game, or let's leave it with which instrument then would you teach them? If you could take an instrument with you, what would you teach them?
What instrument would I take? I play some Irish musical instruments, so I might just bring a mandolin or a bodhrán with me to give them a little bit more of an insight into the traditions from a musical perspective that exist here in Ireland.
You're sounding very multi-talented here, Adrian. With do you play the mandolin? You said you used to play a few instruments.
Yeah, I do. I don't play it any longer, but I'd certainly be able to play it. So, but yeah, I wouldn't say I'm multi-talented. I try everything, and I try some of them, and I perform badly, but I like to try a lot of things.
That was great. I mean, from my perspective, I was speaking to an international level Gaelic and footballer, badminton player and commercial director of a multinational company who also plays the mandolin. It's quite an impressive mix. Okay, so what would you tell them about humans?
I would tell them, again, relaying it back, if I was sitting down with a game of Texas Hold'em, I'd tell them that humans are 100% honest when playing poker almost all of the time.
Very nicely put. Fair enough. What truth would you, or human trait, would you hold back?
Again, back to the poker, I would not tell them that we sometimes bluff.
Yeah, nicely linked. Okay, cool. That's good. Well, let's delve back into the questions.
5 technical questions.
Number 1, if I was a global payroll director about to roll out a new payroll platform, what advice would you give me?
Yeah, it's a funny question. It's often a career-defining moment for a global payroll director, especially if certain things have worked with the existing framework that they've had in place. I guess the advice I would have is very much about knowing the problem areas, fully assessing your own internal structures, processes, systems before committing to a project, knowing what is the actual reason behind going to market to change. I think, it has to be almost associated to a compliance risk, because ultimately the reputational damage that will happen or exist as a result of non-compliance can be too great to actually retrieve or pull back from the market. So, it has to be a genuine reason. It can't be just because it feels like the right thing to do. Other people in the market are doing it. And it certainly can't be driven by a desire to change the landscape for a company just from your own career perspective. You can certainly have an extremely successful career by keeping it as is and cleaning things up slightly. But I guess knowing what you want to get out of it and why you're doing it are the key questions there. But there's so much access to support and information in the market currently. My advice would be to build a bank of knowledge and make sure that if you do go to market, you engage with an external provider who has, I suppose, the latest and greatest from a technology perspective, who can actually support and assist you, and more importantly, change their technology as the market demands it going forward.
Excellent. Now, and I know Amidis use your own SaaS global payroll technology, as I understand, or technology platform. What does this mean for your clients?
Yeah, it's a brilliant piece of technology combined with expertise, I think, and that's where the real differentiator would be. But it gives companies central management, full global oversight of where each of their payrolls are globally. It also offers that cutting edge integration. It integrates with any kind of existing HR, finance, time and attendance systems. And what you're trying to achieve here for your customer is removing the historic manual lifting where possible. You're removing that human touch point. You're allowing customers to free up their internal resources and allocate them differently in a business. And you're bringing away the reliance on that kind of human touch point, which is ultimately where sometimes errors happen. And that's through no fault of anyone's. It just happens. So you're trying to really correct that by automating the process in a really, really streamlined way. And what it does for our customers, as I said at the beginning of the process, is that it actually elongates the time that they have to input changes. And we process the payroll in a very, very fast way, comparatively speaking, based on the RPA scenario.
Sure. So, I mean, with RPA coming in and with automation being implemented, if you like, across payrolls at the moment, one of the new skills we often talk about that the industry is evolving to is more skills in reporting and analytics. So can you recommend any ways a payroll professional may be able to utilise reporting and analytics to improve delivery, bearing in mind the increased automation and RPA that's coming in?
I think ultimately what the analytics piece will allow a company to do is actually, it happens by default of having good information in your actual platform. So this is a real kind of after the fact harmonized analytics tool that I suppose companies can use in a tangible way. And where companies will really see the benefit of this is where there's been a historic cultural, I suppose, look at payroll as a cost as opposed to something tangible that you can use in a strategic way. So I think that's where the real value add will be from a reporting and an analytics perspective, is to bring that kind of harmonized, multi-country reporting, uniformed output across the board that you can actually now say, here you go to a CFO. These are the costs from a pension perspective that we've paid out in EMEA over the last 18 months, or across EMEA, or across APAC, or globally. So it's using the information in a harmonized way to really assess costs and allow at the top table to strategize based on the information you're shooting out from a payroll perspective.
So would you see the person doing that analytics and reporting, would you see that as a role of a payroll director or payroll manager, or would you see that as a specialist, going forward in the future, a specialist payroll position, maybe a payroll analytics specialist or whatever it might be? Would you see it as a role in its own right, or would that form, in your view, part of an existing payroll director or payroll manager remit?
Great question. I think, to be honest, Nick, what you're trying to achieve here is a piece of technology that will almost do this for you as a result of the information received. So I don't think it needs to be a specific assigned task to anyone. I think what it should be is the end user or the customer who's using this particular piece of technology. So I talked about different regions. I talked about US, I talked about EMEA and APAC. You should ultimately have an owner in a customer's business in each of those regions who can report on all of this in a very, very user-friendly way without having to have it as a specific piece or a specific responsibility for them. If the outsourced provider is offering an end-to-end solution, the data analytics and the business intelligence tools should be a part of that offering that the end customer will ultimately have access to when required.
Can be really well used to support strategic decision making. You use those analytics and that reporting to justify, for want of a better word, a reason for making a change or improving a process.
No, absolutely. And that's ultimately where you want to get to. It's a singular corporate analytics platform and a vision across all needs and geographies for a business.
So with technology changing then, we've mentioned RPA a couple of times. For those not familiar, that's robotic process automation on the rise. How do you see the payroll industry in 3 to 5 years from now?
I think where companies are trying to get to is, the 4 things that they absolutely want are improved automation, automated validation, which is the RPA piece, and business intelligence and analytics. So from an RPA perspective, I think where we're going is faster, more efficient turnaround times, which will increase the time that customers will have to input changes, less time required to process the actual payrolls. I think ultimately where we're going to get to is, as more companies look at their internal structures and they roll out, single source of truth HRIS systems, the human input will become less and less required from a customer perspective. perspective. I don't think in an outsourced provider's perspective, you can ever replace the expertise from a tax or from a payroll perspective, because ultimately the changing landscapes from a regulatory perspective will never be captured by a piece of technology. But combining both of those will ultimately remove the customer's need to have internal resources, and they certainly will never need to increase the level of resources internally if the headcount of the firm increases across the globe, because automation, RPA, that double validation piece will allow for correcting any potential errors at the end of a process at the very beginning of a process when the changes are inputted by the customer.
Excellent. I think there'll be a lot of people relieved to hear that you don't see it necessarily impacting on the fact that we still need payroll people, human people, to manage the process and manage the data. It's certainly an area that we've had payroll people concerned about how they see the industry moving forward. So it'd be really encouraging for them to hear an industry leader talk about the need for there always needing to be a human element to the process.
I just wanted to really go back on the human interaction piece. I think what's happening, or what will happen for global payroll directors in businesses who do outsource, for example, there will always be that need, because the relationship management side and that customer engagement piece just simply has to happen. You can never fully remove and become 100% automated. I think just given the sheer volume of changes, the sheer volume of complexities, and the volume of countries that certain companies are physically present in, you absolutely need that kind of project management type background, that mindset where they can oversee, an ongoing changing landscape. That technology will absolutely support that and allow that to become a reality. But it needs to be driven from both sides by, strong relationship management expertise and project management backgrounds.
Excellent. I think we're also seeing a rise or an increase in the skills people look for in terms of relationship management, communication skills, stakeholder management. They're definitely becoming skills that used to be much more associated with the HR professional, but actually in job specifications now, certainly within the payroll remit, we're seeing a lot more skills being required along stakeholder management skills, communication skills, relationship management skills, and so on. So that was really well put. So what advice would you give then to a payroll manager who wanted to elevate themselves to become a strategic advisor to the board in the future?
Yeah, I think that question is an interesting one, because I think we've come from a place even just 15 years ago, which is quite a short period of time, where paying people in cash, then all of a sudden we moved to pay slips, physical pay slips and checks and into employees' bank accounts. Payroll then moved to, managing kind of multi-country payrolls with multiple providers or outsourced scenarios. And now it's becoming, a far more, I suppose, critical conversation at the top level in a lot of companies. So becoming a strategic advisor to the board is ultimately going to happen if you can present to the board tangible information that will allow or support strategic decisions at the top level that will, number one, I suppose, save costs across the board. So looking at bottom line, what do we cost in Singapore versus Croatia, for example, from a finance perspective, or what are we paying out in employment contributions in X country versus another? Having access to that on the spot information will give the C-suite and the board a real level of comfort that actually this payroll scenario, this payroll information is critical to the future of our business and can really support, from a strategic perspective, how we operate and where we operate.
I think this is excellent advice. I mean, one of the things that's become quite apparent across all these podcasts I've been running is, the one thing that everyone seems to want to do is to elevate the payroll industry. It's still seen potentially as being behind other functions, maybe accounts, HR, whatever it might be. I think here you've just very well and eloquently put a very clear path for people to elevate the industry. They can do that by using some of the systems analytics reporting tools available to them to actually make themselves more relevant to a board, to develop reports that can actually make a real influence at a strategic level. And I think there's definitely opportunities here then for people that do want to elevate their positions within the payroll to do that at board level. That's a really good thing to hear at the end. So look, we're going to open the vault.
Entering the vault.
What is one piece of advice you would give to someone then working in payroll right now?
I think it kind of relates back to the question we just covered in a sense, in that just make sure that you're in an organization where payroll is a visible function and seen as a crucial department as opposed to a cost. So I think positioning payroll in the business is critical, and making sure that you are seen as, something that can add genuine value to the actual overall structure of the business. And I think just specifically then from a payroll person's perspective is to really expose yourself to as many jurisdictions as possible. As this industry evolves, I think the world has become a much smaller place. So trying to gain expertise and exposure across multiple jurisdictions, even from an oversight perspective, will be a really, really crucial part to elevate your career and put yourself, in a regional oversight role in time. So taking snippets of information and exposing yourself to projects by actually asking the question whether you can actually get involved in these things are crucial, rather than waiting for things to happen. Being proactive about what you take on and getting in under the hood with an expert who has done it in the past would be really, really important piece of information.
That's a fantastic answer. I think if you'd given me that question, if I would have attempted to have articulated it in exactly the same way. So it's how I see it from a recruitment perspective. Get to grips, particularly with multi-jurisdictional payrolls. It's what's happening across multiple functions at the moment, and if you have an opportunity to develop your skills in those areas, then definitely take it, because payroll is going to change, and as you say, the world is getting smaller. So fantastic advice, thanks for that. So with the benefit of hindsight, what would be the one career decision you would change?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been asked that question before, and I'm genuinely a firm believer in everything happening for a reason. I think, when I left school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I certainly didn't grow up with a poster on my wall saying I want to work in payroll. But I think everybody finds their path. I don't think I would change anything, because ultimately I wouldn't have landed here in Amidis without the previous experiences I've had or experienced. And sure, I don't think I would change anything, because certain parts of my career allowed me to operate at the top level from a sporting perspective, but also brought the discipline that I wouldn't necessarily have secured if I hadn't operated at that level in my sporting career to bring to the role that I have now in Amidis. So I wouldn't really change anything. I know that's a boring answer, but it's how I feel.
Well, you probably didn't have a post on your wall like I didn't saying you wanted to work in recruitment either, but that's where we started. It's one of those industries like payroll, really, recruitment and payroll, you tend to fall into. I think it's not necessarily a career path that people choose, when you leave school, but actually can be a really rewarding path later.
No, and I think it's rewarding in the sense that, the fact that I suppose your business are so focused in a specific sector and a specific space, there's more to it for you guys than just recruitment. There's a huge element of consultancy and advice that actually companies can genuinely benefit from. So I think when you're really targeted in what you do, it becomes extremely enjoyable and you genuinely feel like you're adding value. So
yeah, 100%. You see careers change, and you've done it for a long time. There were payroll administrators that I placed 15 years ago that are now senior payroll directors, and watching that shift is quite an amazing one to, and the industry's changed in that time as well. So it can be incredibly rewarding when you look over a period of time.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. So if you had the power of foresight and you could change the entire payroll industry with one action or improvement, what would that action or improvement be?
Yeah, I guess the advice I would have there is that ultimately the long-term view of what the payroll industry will look like, in my opinion, is moving to that automated, that integrated scenario. So I think if I was to look at changing the entire payroll industry with one action or improvement, it would be that every company globally looks at cleaning up their own internal structures and HR systems to house clean data, clean information, hold a single source of truth to allow when they go to market to deliver payroll or plug into an outsourced provider, that the fundamentals are already there, the foundations and the building blocks exist to allow them to actually achieve what they want to achieve from an automated perspective when they go to market.
Fantastic. Well, 2 to go. Who motivates you and why?
I suppose my family, first off, I'd have to mention, because I have 2 young kids, my wife, they're all extremely supportive, and I suppose day to day they're the reason I do what I do. I don't ever kind of believe in, talking about people that I've never met. People who've obviously made a difference in history have certainly influenced what I do to a certain extent, but I think it's the people you surround yourself day to day who actually experience with you what you do are the people who ultimately allow you to take the shackles off and achieve what you want to from a career perspective. So I'd absolutely mention my family there. The one thing I suppose from a work perspective that motivates me would be speaking or meeting to a customer after they've been through the trenches from looking for solutions in the market that haven't really worked or things haven't really worked out for them. And we've actually sat down with them in a really, really consultative way and created a solution for them that works specifically for their business that they had struggled to achieve. That feedback from a customer, it's extremely motivating and it just brings huge satisfaction to what we do. And again, it copper fastens the idea in my mind that this business that we work in is completely built on expertise And now we've allowed that expertise to really flourish in the market by combining it with technology.
Fantastic. I mean, that resonates with me as well. I mean, we talked about recruitment, but getting an assignment where they may have used high street agencies or generalist agencies, and then they come to us as a specialist, and we're able to deliver something different that solves all that heartache and those problems. It's
no better feeling.
So I definitely get that. I would probably put my family. I've also got 2 kids, so we're in a similar space. Okay, so if you didn't work in payroll, what would you be doing?
Something obvious, I guess, like a famous Hollywood actor, I guess. I don't know. I suppose I could have gone a number of different routes. I could have tried the sporting career. Funny enough, I turned down trials in the UK with a couple of fairly well-known football teams when I was about 14 or 15 to actually go and represent my country in badminton. So who knows? I don't know. I may not necessarily have been good enough to ever achieve a professional football contract, but I might be there if I hadn't gone down this route. So
Fantastic. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you do this podcast with me today, Adrian. So
thanks a million.
I think we've learned an awful lot about global payroll compliance, RPA, how to manage multi-jurisdictional payrolls. It's been a really exciting and educational talk and journey through what Amidus do and what they offer, how payrollers can go about elevating themselves in the payroll market, using the tools at their disposal, such as reporting and analytics, to really improve and have an effect on strategic decision making at board level. I know it's something that the payroll profession as a whole is really keen to develop and establish, which is to improve their relevancy and importance in the market. And I think Adrian's given us some fantastic insight there today, how payroll managers, payroll directors and so on can really utilise some of those tools to elevate themselves and elevate the industry as a whole. So really, really thankful for that. Obviously really excited to have Adrian on the show. Being an ex-recruiter, as Adrian is, we've got some synergy here, both working now in the payroll industry. I really enjoyed the talk, some really good insight, found some great information out that I didn't know before, such as the fact he's an international badminton player and a Gaelic footballer of a very high standard. So that was really exciting to hear as well. And just wanted to ensure that if people did want to find out more information about the multi-country payroll and tax services that Amidus do offer, please do take a look at their website. There are some excellent white papers that you can download from their site as well if you do want to find out more about global payroll. On their site, they've got a blog, they've got a resources page, they've got webinars, they've got white papers, they've also got country guides. So if you are looking at a specific in-country payroll issue, do take a look at their website. They've got some really good guides that cover subjects for payroll functions across Canada, Australia, the US and more. So it's definitely worth having a look at that. They have some webinars as well on their website that cover issues such as global payroll compliance, the culture and communications piece, where they speak to some industry experts themselves. And they have a webinar on global payroll and GDPR compliance. So if you haven't listened to the GDPR podcast that we released a few weeks ago, and you're still waiting to get up to speed from a global perspective, then it's well worth taking a look at that webinar on their website. So do take a look. That's amidus.com. Been fantastic to be with you today, Adrian. Thanks ever so much for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you all on the Payroll Podcast next week.
You've been listening to the Payroll Podcast with Nick Day of JGA Recruitment, specialist payroll recruiters. If you would like to feature on a future podcast, please contact us. For a wealth of world-class payroll content, please visit us at jgarecruitment.com. See you next week.